On episode 119 of the Nerd Byword, we press play on the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy to see just how well it holds up 20 years later. Is it still swinging strong or all out of web fluid? Raimi Revisited starts now. Welcome into another exclusive episode of the Nerd Byword, the only podcast that can no longer access their web fluid because they accidentally used acne scrub over the supersized zit on their wrist. Dave and I are here today to embark on a series of episodes centered around revisiting the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. It only feels right as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of the release of the first film to see if the tights still fit. Today we'll be looking at that exact film in our Byword Big Talk to see what holds up and what our holdups are. But first, our journalism sense is tingling because it's time for Nerd News! Dave, have you found your prodigal messiah?
You know what? I'm going to be honest with you, man. I don't know. So we have a report from The Hollywood Reporter that producer Dan Lin is in talks to become the Grand Pumbaa of the DC Extended Universe for Warner Brothers Discovery Shamalama Ding Dong. So apparently he is supposed to potentially take on the role similar to that of MCU head honcho Kevin Feige. Now, the report from The Hollywood Reporter, seems to be pretty much set in stone, but Variety reports that Lin hasn't even been extended an offer to, that actually he is but one name in the running. Another name that we have previously mentioned that is rumored to be in the running is, of course, Arrowverse head honcho Greg Berlanti. Now, who is Dan Lin? Well, Lin is a producer who has produced several movies for Warner in the past, including the Lego Movie and the Lego Movie 2, as well as the Lego Batman movie, which admittedly awesome movie. The Sherlock Holmes films that feature Robert Downey Jr., also, a few other movies, including It and It Chapter 2, were produced by Dan Lin. So, what does this mean in the grand scheme of things? Beats me. It's very difficult from that particular portfolio of movies to judge if he's the right guy to shepherd an entire superhero cinematic universe. Big reservation, of course, is that according to the Hollywood Reporter initial report, that Dan Lin would actually be reporting directly to CEO David Zaslav, so he would completely be bypassing Warner Brothers Pictures bosses Michael DeLuca and Pam Abdi, as well as the HBO and HBO Max chief Casey Bloys, and even Warner Brothers television chairwoman Channing Dungey. So in other words, this would basically be entirely resting on Lin's shoulders without any real additional input from other people involved in the movie and television and streaming worlds. And of course, based on some decisions we've seen Zaslav make so far, I'm not 100% sure that having his be the only other voice involved when it comes to making major decisions for DC cinematic features or television productions, that is the best way to go. Chris, thoughts?
I'm afraid that I can't offer a whole lot of input on this. I've seen some of those movies that you rattled off, but how much influence did Dan Lin have on those? Who's to say? Lego Batman was an incredible film, a lot of fun. The first Lego movie was fun as well. I enjoyed those Sherlock Holmes films for the greater part of them, but does that qualify someone to be, the grandmaster of this entire cinematic universe going forward? Who knows? How much does he care about, DC Comics? And does he have that love for the medium that Kevin Feige has? Who's to say? Who knows? And the more that I hear coming out of David Zaslav, the less confidence that I have going forward.
And I think that's absolutely a fair assessment. There's been all sorts of interesting statements made by Zaslav and by reporters who appear to have sources within the organization that seem to indicate sort of a big shift that I'm not 100% convinced is a shift in the right direction. So it remains to be seen if Dan Lin is the guy for the job and maybe can curb some of Zaslav's, let's say, more unfortunate opinions and impulses when it comes to how to run this new merged company. All right, Chris, what have you got for nerd news this wonderful week?
It's very much in line with that. Not even the Dark Knight himself, Dave, is safe from the Warner Brothers Discovery purge. The animated series, The Caped Crusader, a joint project from Matt Reeves, J.J. Abrams, and Bruce Timm, will not be released by Warner but remains in production with the hopes of teaming up with another streaming service. According to The Hollywood Reporter, who broke the news initially, their sources say, quote, "It is believed that the various Warner divisions making the shows and movies will make more money on the titles by selling them to other outlets than having them on Warner's own streamer," end quote. Among streaming services courting the Caped Crusader are Apple, Hulu, Netflix, and more. Dave, every single headline from Warner just immediately takes me back to that clip from Dodgeball where Jason Bateman's character, Pepper Brooks, infamously says, "It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him." Not sure that I have much more to comment at this point.
Yeah, the thing with this whole Batman situation, I mean, Paul Dini is involved in this sucker, right?
Bruce Timm. I don't know about Dini, but I know Timm.
Okay, so Bruce Timm obviously has a
A
a
proven
long
track
pedigree
record.
with
Yeah,
and a proven track record, and not just that. Um, on top of that, here's something to consider, and that is simply that Batman sells, and even DC has figured that out. The comic arm produces so much Batman content; it has become at this point almost laughable, right? So the fact that of all the things that you would go ahead and try to get rid of this Batman product because you're, I guess, trying to move away from animation. And then no wonder all these other streaming services try to jump on it like, a pack of rabid dogs on a bone with a little bit of meat stuck to it. Obviously, there is something there that could have made some money. And it is once again just absolutely. I don't even know how to describe it. Like, it seems so brain dead to take such a proven commodity as Batman, produced in part by a proven commodity like Bruce Timm, and then say, "Oh, we're not going to do that because we don't like animation." Like, this is just so baffling to me, Chris.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't think that there's a whole lot more that we can add to this. Rather than it's completely tone deaf to treat animation this way. Um, I got nothing else, man. Unfortunately.
I'm right there with you.
All right, that wraps up Nerd News segment. If you have more to comment than we can muster today, please hit us up on social media at Nerd by Word on Twitter and Instagram, or at That Nerd Dave and That Nerd Chris, respectively, individually. But after this, our first break, we're going to head back in the time machine to 2002 or 1970. Not sure. But Spider-Man 2002 coming up. All right, we have gathered our forces for this week's Byword. And we're going to start off. I don't know if this is going to be a fix or not, because especially the second film in this trilogy is widely regarded as perhaps one of the greatest, if not the greatest, in some camps, comic book movie superhero film of all time. So I did think, though, that it would be interesting 20 years later, especially off the heels of No Way Home and seeing Tobey Maguire return to the role of Peter Parker, to revisit this trilogy and see just how well it holds up, and if we have any holdups. And we're probably going to have to fix three. Um, But this week we are looking at Spider-Man from 2002, starring Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst, Willem Dafoe, Rosemary Harris, and James Franco. And so, in typical format for the Byword, we have three likes, three dislikes. We have uh, titled them appropriately as our holds up elements and our hold ups. So, Dave, what is the first thing that about Spider-Man that really holds up for you?
Well, to me, it's the supporting cast. I think that a lot of the people in quote unquote minor roles in the movie absolutely knock it out of the park. I think saying that the portrayal of J. Jonah Jameson is probably one of the greatest comic to live action transitions of a character ever is probably not an understatement. Like Jameson is, my God, that's Jameson. It's so perfect. It's not even funny. I'd also argue that this is probably the best Aunt May portrayal in any of the Spider-Man movies. Just for sheer comic book accuracy, I think Aunt May here feels like she literally leapt off the page. I know Sally Fields was quite good in the role as well, as was Marissa Tomei with the progressively younger Aunt Mays. But if you're looking for like sheer comic book accuracy from the main Marvel universe as portrayed in the comic books, I think this is pretty much the Aunt May right here. I also think that Franco is a really, really good Harry Osborn here. He captures that sort of James Deany angst that Harry Osborn has. This tortured, daddy doesn't love me, but he likes my best friend better than me, and that conflicted, I like Peter, but I also am jealous of him thing. I think Franco's really good here. I think his performance kind of goes down the toilet as the trilogy goes on, but here he's pretty darn spot on as Harry. So I think the entire supporting cast is really, really strong, and it really makes the movie just really watchable, even in some of the slower parts. Chris,
Yeah, I think while I think that Rosemary Harris was perfect in this film, I respectfully disagree. And continuing the thread of showing love for animation, Lily Tomlin would like a word because Lily Tomlin is as Aunt May in Into the Spider-Verse, and this just might be like a different flavor or different take on the character because I also love Ultimate Aunt May. She's got that bad, you know, like single mom vibes, and Lily Tomlin truly delivers. So she's my favorite Aunt May, but like that's like splitting hairs. So I think Rosemary Harris is fantastic here. Uh,
I did qualify live action, so
oh, you
Natch.
did. Okay, you did say that. Okay, I missed that bit. Yeah, I mean it was really surprising here because I remember how much I love J.K. Simmons as Jameson here. It was really surprising to see he was only in like two scenes here. So that was a surprise in revisiting this. And James Franco is a very complicated character with the allegations that have been levied against him in the last few years. But I really think that he is very, very good in this role. In so much so, in fact, that I think it's in some ways an upgrade over the comics. A lot of people buy into the fact that Harry and Peter are just best friends, and that's just a given. But a lot of comics content, I just don't see that friendship there. And while I don't get why they're best friends to begin with, I think we could have used a little bit more of development there. Something as simple as like he's a private school transfer, and like so he feels kind of like an outcast, and that's something that he and Peter bond towards. So I could have used a little bit more there, but I buy their friendship. Like it works for me here.
And if you're thinking about, just live action portrayals, we only had a couple of Harry Osborn, and this is pretty much the one where you buy the friendship, because I certainly didn't in the Amazing Spider-Man 2. That did not feel like a realized friendship in any way, shape, or form.
Oh, that was despicable. The Dean DeHaan one where they like
Yeah,
skip rocks on the water and then all of a sudden we're supposed to care about their relationship. Yeah, that was gross.
yeah, that didn't work. All right, Chris, what is something that you thought totally held up? And note, I was totally going to put this in, but you beat me to the punch.
I did. I think that Willem Dafoe in the role of Norman Osborn in the Green Goblin, like this is still the creme de la creme of villains. I don't think you may have like favorites, but if you divorce yourself from all subjectivity, I think this is objectively the greatest villain performance that we've seen, not only in comic book movies, but like maybe even in fiction. Like I would extend this to any other genre as far as villainy goes. Like this is like Oscar level worthy type stuff. Like his descent into madness and then the multiple personalities of the Goblin and Norman. It's straight out of the Lee Romita era, where like almost you almost see like the sparkles on the panels of like where he's going back and forth between Norman and the Goblin. I think it's a masterclass in acting. It's a tour de force, and it only makes me appreciate the fact that he still, kicked booty in the role 20 years later in No Way Home, and really brought it right back. We'll talk about other elements of the Goblin here in a minute, I'm sure. But as far as acting performances go, like I think that even may have been a hindrance for some of the other acting performances because he was like taking their lunch money.
Oh, he wasn't just taking their lunch money. I'm surprised they had any sets left to film this movie on, because he was chewing the scenery so intensely. I mean, he was totally hamming it up, but I think he's also one of the actors that absolutely got the assignment. Like, he knew he had to be larger than life. He knew he had to go big. And he did, and it was fantastic. I really have very little to add here. It's just, I absolutely love his performance at this. I love the whole scene where he's talking to the Goblin mask and he's crawling on the floor, and like everything that he did in this movie felt right for the character and the heightened reality of a comic book movie. I absolutely adore his performance.
And I remember being so incredibly disappointed in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 for a multitude of reasons, but one of the greatest reasons for my disappointment is I'm a huge fan of Chris Cooper as an actor. I remember every science class in middle school we had to watch October Sky. And so like I think the world of Chris Cooper as an actor, and I think he would have been a respectable Norman, but they completely wasted him. Like, and so I'm still frustrated about that. But yeah, like Dafoe is the class here.
Absolutely.
Dave, your second holds up element of Spider-Man 2002.
I mean, the movie's 20 years old at this point, so we can argue back and forth about, the level of CG and special effects and all that. That's all fine and dandy. I'm not really interested in having that argument. I think that Spider-Man as a character moves in a very, very particular way in the comic books, with very specific motions and poses. And, it's become ingrained, I think, in comic book fans everywhere, that this is the way Spider-Man moves. It's so particular and it is so visually striking. And I love that this movie took such pains and took so much time to try to make Spidey move the way he moves in the comic books, to imitate the poses and the motion as much as possible. I think in an interview back then, Sam Raimi referred to it as something like his dance, the way he swings from place to place. It's like a dance. And I absolutely adore that, because getting Spider-Man's motion right is so intrinsic to the character. That's one of the reasons something like that old 70s TV show never quite clicked, is because Spidey didn't move like Spidey. It looked, hokey. But as soon as you get that dance right, those poses, that movement through the air as he swings, the way he lands, every little bit of his motion, they went to pains to capture. Now, was the CG always great? No. By modern standards, certainly not. But the movement of Spidey was spot on, and I absolutely love that.
Yeah, it as a kid who grew up with the Fox Kids animated series, like it, that was much more faithful in that adaptation of movement on screen. And so when this came out in 2002, I just remember, but like, this is it. This is right. This fits. And so I think for better or for worse, and I'll talk about this much more in depth later on. I think for better or for worse, and I even previously hinted at it. This is very much pulled out of a Lee Romita era, or even like a Conway Andrew type of title. This very much feels like 1970s Spider-Man, and one of the ways in which that works for its benefit is the movement of Spider-Man on screen.
Yeah, absolutely. I can agree with that. All right, Chris, what is your second thing that you think still holds up about the movie?
I think this is a very macro thing, but go figure, it's me. So I think that the influence of this film on subsequent comic book movies or superhero franchises, I think it's undeniable. You can very much see like the inception of so many different elements that we would come to enjoy in subsequent films. And so I think that this film, the good, the bad, and the indifferent, I think it stands at a true time of importance. And so from a storytelling perspective, um from a hero versus villain versus, you know, the hero's journey, if you want to go back into, theory. So and I really just think that even the nitpicks that we'll get to in a moment, I think that the importance of this film and what it means for the genre as a whole, and its influence is undeniable.
Yeah, I think that's you're absolutely right. That's pretty much undeniable. I will say, when we talk about like the dawn of the modern superhero movie, a lot of people say, well, this sucker started with Blade, and not to take anything away from Blade as far as like the financial impact it had on keeping Marvel afloat and everything. Blade does not feel like a traditional superhero movie. It's not a cape and cowl kind of movie, And then a couple of years before this Spider-Man movie, we had X-Men, and X-Men didn't really feel like a traditional superhero cape and cowl kind of movie. I mean, they very specifically rejected the colorful costumes, in exchange for black leather. So this is to me the point where Sam Raimi kind of proved that a traditional cape and cowl style superhero movie can work with modern audiences. And this is to me the linchpin of everything we've gotten since. Comic book movies before, absolutely fine and dandy. We had Blade, it was successful. We had X-Men, and it was successful. But neither one of those movies are, a masked superhero movie. This is, and it proved once and for all, this stuff works. And so I think everything we've gotten since, rolling all the way into the MCU, owes a debt of gratitude to this movie.
Yeah, I immediately thought of Blade. X-Men I try not to think about. But I immediately thought of Blade and its influence and its impact. But I truly think that it operates in its own territory. So I don't think that it's a apples to apples comparison.
Exactly.
And I really love the first Blade film. I haven't watched the second one in a very long time, and I don't think I ever watched Trinity, but I think that's probably a bullet that I dodged, or a stake that I dodged, I guess. But I truly think that it operates completely different territory, and I don't think it's like a race to the finish, like haha, I was first. I don't think that's the measurement that we're going for here, or that we should go for. I think, no matter where you finish in the race, I think, did you make an impact culturally? And this inevitably did. All right, Dave. This is no surprise because you're a musical nerd like I am. So I'm very, very happy to talk about your third hold up element.
I think we have to freely admit that there is probably one weakness in modern superhero movies, and that is that so many modern superhero movies don't feel the need to give the film a recognizable theme, something that you hear and you automatically think, oh my god, this is Spider-Man, this is Superman. Like the John Williams Superman score, to this day we can't get away from that darn score. And the reason I think is because nobody has given us a strong alternative. Like there's no, hey, this is a really good recognizable Superman track. This is Superman, except for maybe like the intro music to the animated series. I think that one is really, really recognizable as well, and comes in at a close second. But if you look, like at the Spider-Man movies, for example, is there a clear Spider-Man theme in the MCU? Is there a clear, Captain America theme? There is sort of an Avengers theme, of sort of Avengers jingle, if you will, but there isn't a musical track where you're like, oh yeah, this is clearly the Avengers. What I really love about this score is it's very, very superhero-y, very big, sort of epic, and it definitely makes you think right away when you hear the music, oh, oh, this is Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. Like it's recognizable, it's clear. It's a very, very good score from start to finish. It really complements the movie well. But most importantly, it's just recognizable. Like if you were to make me listen to the Man of Steel music, I couldn't point to Superman's theme in that, or something that makes me say, oh, that's Zack Snyder's Superman. Like it's also drony and I don't know, man. Not melodic, I guess. And the MCU is just as guilty of that. They don't really write themes anymore. They write scores, sure, but they don't write themes. And this had a theme, and I really, really like that. I think that's a holdover from older, superhero movies that really needs to make a comeback. Chris Reeve's Superman had a very clear theme. Batman in the Burton movies had a very, very clear theme. Heck, I remember reading an interview, was it Hans Zimmer or something, that did the score for the Dark Knight movies? And he was like, no, Batman doesn't have a theme because he hasn't earned it yet. And I'm like, dude, what? Batman Begins, we don't have a Batman theme because Batman hasn't earned a theme? That's ridiculous, dude. Like give us a Batman theme. And when he's Batman, he can have a Batman theme, okay? Like put on the cape, put on the cowl, boom, Batman theme, please. So I appreciate that about this movie.
No, dude. And for me, I think the lasting impact of Matt Reeves, the Batman, is that score. It's the thing that I immediately think of. I mean, like the dome, 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 dome.
Yeah, it's so recognizable, dude. It's
every
so
time
good.
He comes on screen, and you hear that, and you combine that with his boots, and it automatically transports you there. And I think that's another thing that this film does. And as far as like the MCU Spider-Man, and I love that they did, because it's such an iconic thing. They recycled the old animated series theme song, and they set it to like orchestral, like a symphonic rendition, and that's great. But like it doesn't really permeate throughout the entire film. I think you have it throughout certain things, but like it's not an all-inclusive thing like the Batman is.
All right, so what is your final thing, Chris, that you feel holds up about the movie?
Well, you know me, I'm a feeler, and so like the fact, one of the things about Spider-Man that they absolutely get right here in this film is he is the people's hero. He's the people's champ. He's the most electrifying superhero in all of sports entertainment. No, but I love like all of the corny little like New York elements of this film, and it's so like perfectly representative of like a Spider-Man comic book. And so like the parts where like they start throwing stuff at the Green Goblin, they start like throwing, I don't know what that was, like fruit or pumpkins or something, and it helps Spider-Man out. Like and subsequent films do a great job of this too, but like it was just so pleasurable to see this happen, and that, even though the cops are like after him because of the yellow journalism from the Bugle and Jameson, like he's still like, well, go get him, but I'll be here waiting for you. And so like I think that's probably the overall thing I think that I enjoyed the most about revisiting this film is like, Spider-Man is a man of the people. He's an everyman, and that's what makes him so incredibly relatable, and that he does the right thing at the right time for the right reasons, and that the public recognizes him for that.
Yeah, I like that a great deal too. Obviously, there's always in the comic books a lot of, I guess, divided opinion about Spidey. But generally speaking, the people that he has interacted with and has saved and has helped, there's always a very clear sense that they know that, what the Bugle is putting out there is a bunch of crap. So they capture that really well, I think.
All right, unfortunately, we have to move into the negative stuff. Not the negative zone. That's Fantastic Four. But Dave, what is your first holdup of this film?
So obviously, I think we have to go back to our friend Willem Dafoe and the Go-Go Power Rangers Goblin suit.
Speaking of iconic scores.
Yes, absolutely. Bring on that electric guitar. I really, really feel like the Goblin design is totally booty in this movie. And I'm pleased that they did a lot to sort of rehabilitate the design in No Way Home. by smashing that horrible helmet and adding some accessories that make him seem a little more Goblin-like as far as what the comic book design goes. I'm sure you've seen it. It's made the rounds for several years now, and it keeps popping up on social media occasionally. There's an animatronics test for a Goblin mask that has made its way online several times. And it's a little more authentic to what it looks like in the comic books. And I really think the Ultimate comic books made a really good argument for it not being a mask, but there being like a physical transformation that, kind of like werewolf style, where the Goblin, is physically different from Norman Osborn rather than him just putting on a rubber mask. And I think if they would have leaned into that and used that animatronic, which I tell you, man, I think that animatronic test was great. It was really, really cool and would have given the Goblin a very different kind of vibe in this movie, a face that really goes along well with the performance that Willem Dafoe turned in. So I'm very disappointed, particularly that they didn't use that animatronic face mask and instead, went for a helmet where you can hardly even see Willem Dafoe's face through, and it stifles the performance. And I know people are going to say that are listening to this, well, an animatronic mask would have not seen his face at all. No, because the animatronic would have been a replacement for his face. It would have been a completely different look, and we would have had something that's extremely expressive. If you look up that animatronics test, it's a very, very, very expressive face that they put together there. And it would have been a far cry better, I think, than what we got. So I really, really dislike the Goblin design in this movie. It still irks me 20 years later.
Maybe this is my hot take. I don't like either suit. I'm not a fan of the Spider-Man suit either. I think it's very representative of 2002. I don't think it's timeless at all. I think my greatest nitpick of the spider suit is the eyes. They look like cheap stick-ons. Like they look like press-on nails that you did yourself, and it doesn't look good. Similarly, I guess I always go to the eyes, but like the most pointless thing I think with the Goblin costume is the fact that his yellow lenses go up and down like at will, but like for what reason? Like it's totally pointless. Yeah, so there's so much to make fun of here, and I absolutely loved what they did in No Way Home with that character design. I think it's much more representative of the character.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, man. All right, what's your first thing that you kind of think does not hold up?
Well, I've got a couple of subplots here, or subpoints, I guess, but I have major issues with the cast. The fact that we have 30-year-olds portraying high schoolers, and not just 30-year-olds, but like visibly older than high school age. Like it's not even close, not even believable that they would be in high school. Particularly Maguire. That kind of went away for me once they finally graduated. And so I know that this is an origin story, so you kind of have to start in high school. But the fact that they're even trying to portray high schoolers, I think it's just it's laughable. Joe Manganiello as Flash Thompson looks like a predator, because he's a 35-year-old man that goes back to torment high school children. Like it's just not a great look. And then I kind of had an epiphany. Well, first, before I get to that epiphany, Maguire as Peter is really weird in this film. We kind of talked about it on social media a little bit in advertising for this episode, but he comes across as extremely unlikable, and he comes across as, I guess the gauche term right now is an incel, and he comes across. I said that he comes across as a potential school shooter, and that spider biting him saved countless lives that day. I have real problems with high school Peter in particular in this film. It is not representative of anything in comics. Now, Lee Ditko Peter was a jerk, but he was not like this. I think this is a missed opportunity here. And I don't really buy his Peter until halfway through the film. I think the turning point for me where I started to buy it was the speech in the hospital with MJ. That was a great turning point and a great performance by Maguire, and I started to buy it there. And then my epiphany, as advertised, I really ragged on Kirsten Dunst for a long time, and like almost like a not my MJ kind of thing. But I'm not campaigning like that because I'm not a lifeless loser on social media. At least I like to not think that I am. But I kind of saw something here because it's not a bad performance. But I think she's miscast as MJ, and then it struck me. Kirsten Dunst is Gwen Stacy. Like she's naturally, I think, like a brunette. So like she could easily, and she's done roles where she's been blonde before. The hair color doesn't really matter. I really think that she's Gwen Stacy. She is. I think the comparison between the two, and I've made jokes about how Gwen Stacy till the cows come home, but I think that the power of Gwen as a character is in her understated nature and her quiet strength. And I think that that's something that Dunst really brings well to the role. I think that in contrast, the prototypical Mary Jane Watson is what we got in Emma Stone. So it's weird, like this role reversal. In Emma Stone's Gwen, she's vivacious, she's lively, she is the pants wearer in the relationship. She is the controlling figure. And so it's like we have this body swap, because I think Kirsten Dunst would make a fantastic Gwen Stacy. But I don't buy her as Mary Jane. Like it's just not there for me. But she is good in this role. I think it's just the wrong girl.
There's a lot to unpack here. So yes,
I cheated. It's like it's 4 holdups in one.
Yeah, so I think the casting issues are perfectly fair. I think that yes, having always grown people trying to portray teenagers is troubling, and I can tell that they were trying to avoid at least some of that by getting them out of high school as fast as possible. Like we didn't get a whole lot of high school hijinks. I mean, in the first part of the movie, boom, they're graduating, hallelujah. So they try to get them out of there fast, but yeah, the high school scenes don't work because everybody looks like they were in the movie Grease with John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John. 40-year-old people playing high school kids, what it felt like. So I totally will echo that. You might have noticed that when I said something that holds up is the supporting cast, and I did not talk about the main cast. And that's because the center of the movie, Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst, I don't think worked very well in this movie, looking back at it. And that's partially, I think, what's on the page. And it's partially, I think, some choices made in the acting. What didn't work on the page very clearly from the get-go is the portrayal of Mary Jane. I don't think she is, as you said, written as Mary Jane. I don't even think she's necessarily written as a Gwen Stacy from what I know from her. I think Kirsten Dunst would make a great Gwen Stacy, sure, but I don't think there was a strong role in that character for any female actress. I think the character is very passive, I think is the best way to put it.
Yes.
Without a clear arc, really.
I think she's very reactive to the men in this film.
Very much so, yes. So I found that disappointing in Mary Jane. And Toby, he does not come across as a nerd in this movie. He comes across as a dweeb. I think that's the best way to put it. Like, there are nerds that are a little outcasts because they're just, nerdy. And then there are dweebs that they're a little nerdy, but they also just make people feel deeply uncomfortable. Like somebody walking up and taking your picture randomly, and you just know darn good and well he's going to have it on his computer later on, staring at it creepily with the lights down low. That's sort of how Toby comes across in this. He never quite clicks for me as a likable Peter Parker,
especially when he's taking pictures. That's very creepy.
And you noted that the hospital scene where he's talking about about Mary Jane, that's a place where it clicked for you. I hate that speech so much with a passion. Like, I just absolutely hate it. I hate to say this, but it is so. It's like I need 2 bottles of wine with that cheese, and I like cheesy stuff. I love Superman, and there's a certain amount of cheese built in with Superman, but the thing about Mary Jane is that when you're with her, that you just don't feel quite normal. Like, okay, thanks for that. I don't know if that's a compliment or not, but that's just creepy. So even there, he just didn't quite work for me. He just never quite clicked for me as Peter Parker. Parker to me is a guy that is not necessarily completely socially inept. And he does not usually come across as creepy or even mean spirited necessarily, unless I don't know, man. I think I'll talk about this more in a minute, but I think that the main cast didn't quite click looking back at it. And the love story for sure didn't click, especially knowing how it progresses over the next couple of movies. In hindsight, I don't like the way the love story is portrayed in any way, shape, or form across these movies.
All right, let's dive right into that, because I've hinted at it and teased it, and so have you, and I'm really interested in talking about it at length.
The movie has a distinctively old-fashioned vibe, and Sam Raimi in a lot of ways is sort of just an old-fashioned movie maker. He likes being an old-fashioned dude. Like, he radiates that. And yeah, now I know he's an old guy now, but we got to remember there's also a rebel underneath all that. If you ever look up the making of the first Evil Dead movie and how they did that, I mean, the guy has a little rebel in him too. But once he became a more successful director, he just became deeply old-fashioned. And that radiates off of him even on set. If you've ever seen any pictures of him on set, he's always wearing a suit and tie. He very much is like, I'm going to come to my work looking as professional as possible. That's not necessarily normal for directors these days. So he's an old-fashioned dude, and he has old-fashioned sensibilities. Even in his horror movies, he likes to do these extreme close-up, quick zoom things that haven't really been in vogue in scary movies in a long, long time. He does that quite a bit in Spider-Man 2 when it comes to Doc Ock. That whole scene where the arms come alive with the doctors around them. That's very much old-fashioned, horror movie style filming, and he's really in his element when he does that. So he has old-fashioned sensibilities, and this whole movie feels like an old-fashioned sensibility. And maybe he's on to something at the very least with some of the things about Peter, because Peter very much feels like he's not really a teenager, but like an old soul. Like, he really strikes you as somebody who's oddly old-fashioned for 2002. You believe that a 90-year-old woman raised him. Like, he acts like he's 50 in some of these scenes, in how he talks and his whole attitude. So I think the movie is incredibly old-fashioned, and I think you're onto something when you say it's very much something that is steeped in like the 60s and 70s comic books. And I wish they would have made it a period piece for that reason, because it's really, really jarring to have a movie set in 2002 that feels so old-fashioned in so many different ways, and yet is supposed to be a modern movie. Like, if this would have been a movie set in 1967 or something, I think this would have clicked completely differently. And I think we would have even forgiven maybe a little bit how passive Mary Jane is in that movie, because that's sort of a hallmark of movies from that time period as well, is that the female lead tends to be more reactive than in modern movies. So I think as a period piece, it would have worked a lot better, this old-fashioned vibe. But as it stands, it just felt awkward.
Yeah, it's so non-committal, and I think that's to its detriment, because and I'm interested for a multitude of reasons to revisit the sequel, because it's held up as the best. But I still think that it is non-committal with its setting, because it is. I mean, I look at even like Peter's fashion choices, and I'm like, yep, this is Lee Ramita. Yep, this is the 1970s. All he needs is that like brown jacket with the fur inline, the faux fur, and we're there. But yeah, and I think the fact that it doesn't completely commit to the bit is for its detriment, because at the same time it's like, oh yeah, this is the 1970s kind of vibe, but here's Macy Gray. And here's Dr.
The thing that holds up the absolute least is that Macy Gray cameo. It just, like, Macy Gray, it was not regrettably a artist that stood the test of time and stayed in the popular eye for very long. So it just like immediately dates this movie, just that she's even there. It's even worse than Vanilla Ice in the second Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies. It's just like, it's so like, well, that person nobody gives a crap about for already 20 years.
Yeah. And then she tries to walk away and she stumbles. And then you try to hide it. But it's clear. This movie's dated when it is not there. But yeah, so it's really funny that you say Grease, because we just lost Olivia Newton-John here recently, and I think the world of Grease. As campy as it is, I was a kid that was raised on musicals like Grease, so I absolutely love it.
Oh, I love it too. Yeah,
I love it so much. I love Olivia Newton-John. Lord rest her. But I think what I wanted from MJ in particular was that Sandy turn. At the end, it's still like one of the most iconic scenes in film history and cinematic history. Is like the tell me about it stud turn. Like we needed that from MJ. Like that's something that you need, and we didn't get it, and it's to its detriment.
All right, Chris, what is your next doesn't hold up moment of this movie?
The wrist zits. I mean, like, how long do we need to spiel about it? It's so disgusting. It's so gross. Tell me that Sam Raimi is a master of horror without telling me, because of these zits on his wrist. It's not even anatomically correct, because he would be shooting the webs out of his anus if we wanted to go for a completely anatomical spider thing. I don't know what to say about it. They made a great referential joke about it in No Way Home. It's so creepy. It's so gross. It undermines the genius of Peter Parker. The fact that he's like, well, I've got all this other spider stuff. I might as well use my brain and come up with, a web fluid. And so, yeah, it's just disturbing.
I hate him. I hate the organic web shooters. I hate the fact that they try to integrate them into the comic books.
Oh, yeah.
No. No. I'm done.
All right, we've danced around your last hold up, but let's go in full force.
Yeah, Spider-Man is not Spider-Man in this movie personality-wise. I mean, I love the way he moves and everything. I think that was spot on. But Peter Parker doesn't feel like Peter Parker. We noted already earlier that Toby feels more like a dweeb and not like a nerd. And there was something about Peter in the comic books. He did connect with people. He wasn't like socially inept or something, which it seems like Tobey Maguire's version of Peter is just incredibly socially inept and oblivious, especially when it comes to stuff about Mary Jane or stuff about Harry. And as this trilogy goes on, he just seems more and more oblivious. Like there's zero growth in this human being. But one of the things that kind of bugged me the most is the complete absence of any kind of quippy Spider-Man-ness, like there's no motor mouth Spider-Man in this movie. He's not shooting off one-liners or trying to throw his enemies off by, saying something funny, or there's none of this. There's a really, what did we get? You're out of it, Gabi, out of your mind. That's one. That was super, thanks. And then we get that one homophobic moment in the wrestling ring.
You took it from me. I was about to go with it, yeah.
This that's a cute outfit. Did your boyfriend make it for you? That's what we get from Spidey. And so no, the personality is completely wrong of both Peter Parker and Spider-Man in this movie. And again, within the context of the movie, I guess it works, that old-fashioned sort of classic Hollywood veneer over it. But if you're looking for like a really good adaptation of who Peter Parker is and who Spider-Man is in the comics, this ain't it, regrettably.
Yeah, I think that's something that both Tom Holland and Andrew Garfield nail. Now, there are plenty of things to criticize about the Amazing Spider-Man film franchise, but one thing that I keep going up for and riding for is that Andrew Garfield nails the Peter Parker-ness of it all. And it's a very when did that movie come out? 2008, 2012, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
It's a late aughts, early tens vibe of Peter Parker. It's very much of its time interpretation, but I think it works. And a lot of people say, "Oh, he's too handsome. There's no way that he would be an outcast." I'm like, okay, this is from the same people that like loved movies like She's All That, where Rachel Lee Cook removes her stereotypically nerdy glasses and suddenly she's the belle of the ball. Like, get out of here with that. So I really enjoy Garfield in particular from that, because it's a believable thing. Like, once you get past the social outcast, the dork of it all, like, of course he's going to make connections with people. Like, and that's something that Lee Ditko gets right from the jump of, like, yeah, he's a nerd, but like he's still pulling Liz Allen, he's pulling Betty Brant, he's pulling MJ and Gwen. Like, he's not an idiot, he's not inept. And the best.
And whoever said Peter Parker was not a good looking guy is my question. Like, are we looking at the same art here?
And so, like, I think you're totally right in that. And then for me, the quintessential parts, one of the most quintessential elements of Peter Parker, of Spider-Man in costume, is the quips, is the fake it till you make it, way over your skis, and you overcompensate for your own lack of confidence by, dragging your opponent by coming up with stupid little nicknames. And it's really regrettable that the only time that we got something that was remotely like that is a homophobic joke about, whether Macho Man Randy Savage or Bonesaw is gay. Like, okay, that's the best that you got. And then it's
I
it's
was I was
it's a
hope
good,
I was
big
personally
miss.
I was personally hoping for a Kool-Aid Man joke. I think that would have been great, considering what Macho Man Randy Savage sounds like when he talks.
Or
Like, we could we
I would have gone so meta and be like, you really sound like a knockoff Macho Man Randy Savage.
there's a oh yeah there's so many the better things they could have done with that. Like, it's just, yeah.
Or even here's another meta one. Who do you think you are, Crusher Hogan? Like, come on.
Ah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. All
And
right. Final.
that was with no prep time. Like, come on, guys.
Yeah. So give it to me straight, man. What is the last thing that you didn't think held up?
Yeah, this is my greatest pet peeve, not just for this film, but not just this trilogy, but for all Spider-Man films ever. Please stop unmasking for no good reason. Like, it's quite enough. It's the willful unmasking as well. I think it's inexplicable with the robber scene with Uncle Ben's killer. He just, like, rips his mask off. Like, what did you hope to achieve there? Doesn't put it back on when the spotlight comes on him. It's just really, really strange. So it's my greatest pet peeve, the unmasking of it all. They do it at the end because of battle damage and singeing of the mask. I'm over it.
I think the best. So here, I think what it comes down to is that it's a lack of faith in the actor's abilities, that you constantly have to take the mask off in order to let them perform. I think it is perfectly valid that you can have an actor whose face is almost completely obscured or completely obscured and still get a good performance out of that. And that's really what's required with Spider-Man. Instead of constantly taking the mask off and running around without a mask on, you have to be willing to trust the actor's ability to perform with the face obscured. I mean, that's what you're looking for, right? There's a lot of stuff going on with body language, with voice. There are things that you can do to still have a great performance, even though the mask is stationary. And so I think that's really what they keep doing the unmasking for. I think the ending with the battle damage is perfectly fine. I buy that. It's not the first time that's happened in Spider-Man comic books either. So I buy that. But every time that he keeps taking it off, or it's taken off from him, it becomes sort of a running joke almost in the Sam Raimi trilogy, how often the mask just so happens to be removed, and it gets a little silly at some point. I totally agree.
Yeah, I think it's also disingenuous because he's so concerned with like his identity being known, and as a result, his loved ones being threatened. I mean, it's the whole reason at the end of the film that he can't be with MJ or whatever, like the tropiest of all tropes, tropiest of all tropes. But and then for like, it's one thing to be unmasked, but then like he always just like, oh God, let me get some web fluid or something, some kind of way to obscure my identity and maintain that. I mean, like it's probably like one of the most identifiable things about Spider-Man is maintaining that secret identity, and for them to go so loose with it is just frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
All right, so those are our hold up elements and our hold ups with Spider-Man 2002. When we come back from our final break, we're going to hit you with 2 more nerd commendations. All right, we are back for the fan favorite segment of every episode, none other than our very own Commendations. All right, Nerd Nightmare is right around the corner, and you are way too gleeful, my friend.
I'm always gleeful. So I think we're gonna have to just talk for a second about The Walking Dead, not the television series, because boo on that. I think they kind of ran that into the ground. But I am a huge fan of The Walking Dead comic book. I think it works on so many levels, and it is wonderful. It's over now. It's had God, 100 and God knows how many issues, but it is wrapped up. It is complete. And it stands now as a finished work that you can enjoy from beginning to end. And so I kind of had trepidations when it was announced a couple years back, I think, that they were going to re-release in single issues all of The Walking Dead in full color, that they were going to go back and color a series that originally had been, designed and published in black and white. And so I'm a big fan of black and white art when it is done intentionally and with purpose, and not as a cost-cutting measure of an indie comic that can't afford a colorist, But if you go in and it's intentional and it's purposeful, I love black and white art. I think it is an art unto itself. So I had a lot of trepidation about the notion of having the Walking Dead re-released, this time in full color. And so initially I stayed away from it, and then more recently I decided to reread a couple of issues that have since been, released in color, to kind of just get a sense for what is being done with it. And I have to say, the colorist that was brought on board, I believe it's Dave McCaig, is knocking it out of the park, dude. I think he might be converting me. I still really love the black and white look of the Walking Dead comics, so much so that I wish they would have done the television series in black and white too, to match that look. It's just a very cool look. But man, when you look at some of the more emotional moments that happen in the comic book and then see the color choices being made, it looks so cool, man. It's just, I don't even know how to describe it. It's not going for like a fully 100% realistic look. There's a lot of interesting things happening with our color shading and stuff. Some of these moments, like there's an issue in issue 14. There's this moment where a character is dying and then comes back, as a zombie, which happens so much, and there's just this bluish, greenish hue over everything. And then the blood in the scene really just kind of pops out and slaps you in the face. It is so much better than it has any right to be. So I love the original Walking Dead comic book. I love the black and white art, but I am so impressed with Dave McCaig and how he is going about coloring this book and the color choices he's making. I could talk about that at length, and I think it would be fun even just to sit down and like kind of go through a whole bunch of issues and just kind of analyze the color choices he's making, because he's not just going in and like slapping a coat of paint on this. He's very intentionally, putting his stamp on the art that already exists and making very cool artistic choices and trying to enhance the storytelling. So I kind of think I'm in love, Chris.
It's funny that you say that. I think, with the advent of Nerd Nightmare and your not so subtle attempts to horrify me. The one element of horror that really still just does not landed with me is zombies, and I don't know why. Um, maybe we need another zombie flick for Nerd Nightmare this year, because the only one that I have is Night of the Living Dead, and that one just made me furious, and I love to poke fun at. So I think
I'm ready to blow your mind. Are you ready for this?
okay.
I think it would be fun to watch the Dawn of the Dead remake, which was directed by this little director that you've probably never heard of by the name of Zack Snyder.
Oh no, not the S word.
And yeah, and I think James Gunn actually had a hand in the script. It is a very, very interesting interpretation of Dawn of the Dead, and although it has some very, sort of 2000s things going on in it, there's shockingly some really cool stuff in there too. So yeah, I just endorsed the Zack Snyder movie. So what?
Blow my mind. I see what you did there. Not so subtle.
All right, Chris, what is your nerd commendation this week?
I feel like Michael Corleone right now. Just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in. I'm back in. I'm all in, baby. House of the Dragon, the premiere episode. As the time we're recording, we've only had one episode so far. Daggone it, I'm right back in, and I have completely purged from my mind the second half of that last season. It's so good, dude. It's so good. All right, so this is a prequel series to Game of Thrones. It's based off of A Song of Ice and Fire novels by George R.R. Martin, and a little bit more specifically, the novel Fire and Blood. It's set 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones, 172 years before our Lord and Savior Daenerys Targaryen. Praise be upon her. I love it already, man. It's so well done. It's so well acted. Your boy Matt Smith is fantastic as this unlovable scoundrel Daemon Targaryen. He's truly a POS in the best way possible. I legitimately can't stand him, and but I mean he does a great job at it. And the show and a work of fiction is only as good as its villain, and he really brings it already. The cast is out of this world. It's so good. I mean, it's freaking dragons, and the impending civil war amongst the House Targaryen. I just can't wait to see this unfold, and all of the different. The Count of Monte Cristo is my all-time favorite work of fiction. It's my all-time favorite novel. It's my favorite thing ever. And one of the things that really draws me in is the soap opera of it all, and the scheming and the political behind the scenes type of big brain moves and the strategy. It's all a game of chess.
Thrones.
Well, hey, there you go. and it's already setting up to be must-see television, and I'm right back in.
I tried. I keep trying. Maybe I just need to sit down and try to read the books, but then I'm going to be mad that it seems very clear that George R.R. Martin is never going to finish Game of Thrones. Like, it's just not going to happen. So I don't know, man. If I can go there, I also have this trepidation, generally speaking, just about fantasy. It's not something that connects with me as strongly as sci-fi does, and so oftentimes when I try to read fantasy, I fail to completely connect with what I'm looking at. Game of Thrones, despite my repeated attempts, I have not been able to connect with. In fact, I would say the last 20 years or so, the only thing fantasy-wise that I've really 100% fully connected with is The Witcher. I feel that stuff, man. It's just my jam.
It's also the horror elements, let's be honest.
And there's probably a part of that, absolutely. Although I will say a lot of what happens in the short stories, at least to me, feels a lot more straight up fantasy and a lot less horror. And I'm thinking, for example, the story with the Golden Dragon. That was so.
Oh my god!
It is so straight up, fantasy, right down to the point where the three Jectors and Geralt go to like a an inn, and they just like keep eating and eating and eating, and just like every little meal gets described. It's very old school fantasy, and it's still one of my favorite stories from either collection. So yeah, fantasy I think needs to kind of hit me a certain way for it to just work, and Game of Thrones never has. And I feel maybe from what I've seen from the television series, there's something like mean spirited about it almost. Like it's not mean spirited necessarily towards the characters, but mean spirited towards the reader. In that every time you think you have a character you connect with, they do something horrible to that character. It's like designed to mess with you or something. So I don't know about like connecting with it. I love Matt Smith, and he's not made great choices post Doctor Who in projects. I would like to see him succeed in something because he is so very good. And so I wish this show all the best. If I'm actually going to be able to try to sit down and watch it, I don't know.
Yeah, I feel the same way with Reese Ifans. I don't know how I didn't do that in my initial sell. But Reese Ifans, I love him. I love him as Xenophilius Lovegood in a property that I struggle to revisit now in Harry Potter.
Yes.
He's fantastic there. He's acting as took us off in the Amazing Spider-Man films as the Lizard. I loved seeing him come back in No Way Home. Love him as Kurt Connors. And so it's funny that you say that, because I was so excited to see him in this first episode, and then he did something absolutely despicable, and I'm like, I hate you, but I love you. So yeah, it was very, very much that. But if you struggle with fantasy, Dave, don't worry, because by the time this airs, we'll already have the Rings of Power on Amazon Prime.
Which my dirty little secret, of course, is that I also don't enjoy the Lord of the Rings all that much. So
listen, you keep throwing zombies at me, I'll keep throwing elves and dragons at you.
Hey, I like elves and dragons. They're fine in The Witcher. I don't know, man. Lord of the Rings is an odd one to me. No,
it is, and I've talked about this. It is the least approachable for me. I'm a very, I deeply want to be one of those elven translators. Like the old elven stuff that I can read, and I deeply want to be a head over heels Tolkien fan. It's just so unapproachable, and it is not new viewer, new reader friendly, and it is an all-consuming thing. It seems like such a task, and it does not seem welcoming. And
yeah, it's too much work and not welcoming enough.
I say that, you better believe September the 2nd will have already aired. By the time this episode airs, we'll have already seen it. I'm going to be there.
Well, obviously, I mean,
you
need to watch the continuing adventures of Fantasy Eminem, right? I mean, that's what we're needing to do here.
Stop.
I will. I think what we need to do is we need to go on social media and just throw it out there and ask, hey, what's the most approachable, new reader-friendly fantasy series? We love elves, we love dwarves, we love dragons. We want to read this stuff, but these things don't sing. What would sing for us? Like if we like The Witcher, then what else is there that can get us into fantasy? Because I would love to love fantasy.
You would be hard pressed to find something more new reader friendly, new gamer friendly than The Witcher. I love every iteration of it. The game, the Wild Hunt is fantastic. The books are out of this world. The audiobooks. Here's the thing: we're working on a project that's been literally years in the making, Dave and I, and I'm really struggling with it because the audiobook that I'm listening to, it's not the guy who did the Witcher audiobook, so it sucks. So like every audiobook that I follow after that, I'm like, it puts me to sleep. So yeah.
Yep, that's true.
All right, that puts the cherry on top of another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. We thank you for riding along on this dragon with us. And as always, please be sure to like and subscribe to whatever podcasting platform is your preference, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, Amazon, or nerdbyword.com.
And of course, find us on social media on Instagram and Twitter at NerdByWord, and individually at ThatNerdDave and at ThatNerdChris. And most importantly, I want to know, how can you convert me to be a bigger fan of fantasy? Please, for crying out loud, tell me. If I like The Witcher, but I struggle with Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, what might be something that would make my heart sing?
And go to those social pages, click that link in the bio, our link tree. You can find so many things, including our merchandising websites on TeePublic and Redbubble, our socials, and all the goodies. And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.